今天我们对话的 Abigial 是纽约时报的畅销书作家，她的两部小说《爱之船台北》和《爱之船团圆》讲述了亚裔美国青年人经历高中、大学和初恋，探索传统、身份、社会期望和个人独特道路的故事。
So just to get started, I wanted to ask, what does Asian American or Chinese American identity mean to you?
Oh, it's a great question. So I grew up in Ohio, where I was one of a small number of Asian Americans. And so I think as a result, I became much more conscious of being different. People would ask me, what are you? Where are you from? And so I had to think about it. And I think over time, my identity as an Asian American has developed. So in Ohio, I think it was something I was trying to run away from. It was something that was more about my family, the way I looked, and the fact that, we would go back to Asia every so often to visit other relatives. And then as I grew older, going on Love Boat, which is the subject of my story, was an opportunity to meet other Asian Americans who were really proud of being Asian American. And I think then it was an opportunity to connect with, like, okay, the food that we eat in my home actually comes from somewhere. It's not just like, a quirk of my parents, but going to Taiwan, and my character sees dragon fruit and salted eggs and platters of fried eggs. And like, those are all things that remind her of her family. And she realizes, okay, it has an origin and it has roots. And then for me, I studied international relations at Harvard and did my thesis research in China. And so those, again, were more formative opportunities for me to dig into the history and the politics, and just the different value systems of the United States and China, and to come to like a more of a fused sense of my identity. I get to draw from the best of both my worlds, or multiple worlds, with my parents being from the Philippines and Indonesia. And so I think, to me, that today is what being Asian American is. It's being someone who lived at the margins, but in a creative way. I was able to see multiple different issues from multiple points of view. I bring an inheritance of resilience, coming from an immigrant family that has survived a lot of trauma over the years. And now, writing the stories that I'm writing and making the films that I'm working on, those are all opportunities to kind of solidify, different stories around that Asian American experience.
It's great. Thank you for the answer. I definitely relate to a lot of what you were saying. Growing also as a Chinese American, second gen in the Midwest, I think there's similarities there. Great. So my next question actually came from one of our programming coordinators, because she's recently read your book, and she wanted to ask about, wondering if you could talk about your approach to sort of destigmatizing mental health by having an Asian character in your book who sort of seeks out help and resources.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's something that's very, very close to my heart. I think there's a lot of people who don't get help with things like depression or anxiety or other cognitive disorders. Now there's learning differences that I also write about in my book. And these things were kind of just brushed under the rug. They kept them secret. They didn't want anyone to know about them. And, this is true in non-Asian cultures as well as Asian culture. But really, like, there's so much wonderful modern medicine today. There is wonderful talk therapy and different ways of just really managing these things in our lives that can just lead to a much higher quality of life, and also just a lot more peace and happiness. And so I think even taking that first step of acknowledging, okay, there is something here, and then getting help is really, it can go so far in improving all our lives. So yes, very important to me.
Yeah, definitely. What was the experience like? Were your parents open about talking about mental health, or what was that experience like growing up for you?
Yeah, it's not something that we talked about very much. I think it's something I explored more when I went to college. Harvard did have a lot of therapy. I have repetitive stress injury, so I would go to my physical therapy, and I remember my physical therapist would just talk to me all the time about things. And I think just seeing so many people actually who were struggling with depression, and then going and getting help, those are good examples to me. And then when I joined the workforce, the first thing, and this could be, seen as a positive or a negative, but the first thing they do is they hand you this brochure, like, if you need counseling help, here's the number to call. And I think that was actually a recognition that this work environment can be very stressful, which I think is a problem in itself. I think we should actually address the stressful work environment in conjunction with the mental health needs. But I think even just having that resource there, and go talk to a therapist, and you realize that they see a lot of people who are struggling with the same things. And once you have someone who's walked the path ahead of you and can say like, oh, you know, these are ways that you can think about your worries. You can contain your worry, like worry about the things you can control and don't worry about the things you can't control, right? And so just having that wisdom injected into my own life was so valuable. And I think I just wanted more of that as I grew older and older.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely is not a conversation I had growing up at all. Awesome. So I also know that your book has some exciting sort of things in the works for the movie adaptation that you've been working on. Any sneak peek insights for what we can expect whenever it hits Netflix?
Yeah, so I can talk about what's public, which is that we have cast and we did film in Taiwan. We wrapped filming in mid-January and we're now in post-production. So Ashley Liao is playing Ever Wong, Ross Butler is playing Rick Wu, Chelsea Zhang plays Sophie Ha, and Nico Hiraga plays Xavier Ye. They're wonderful, fabulous people. I cannot wait to share this movie with the world. And we also have Lionsgate attached as our global distributor, and Ace Entertainment, the creators of the Netflix adaptation of Jenny Han's work, To All the Boys I Loved Before, is our producers.
Very exciting stuff. And so what sort of experiences growing up inspired you to pursue being a writer specifically and to write Asian American stories?
So I didn't know I was a writer for many years. I loved books, though. I was a total nerd, constantly reading. And I also told stories. So my brother and sister remind me of this, but I would tell group stories, what I called group stories at the time, which was a world of no adults around, a bunch of us kids, and it would just basically define the group at the beginning of the story, which was my brother and sister and I, our cousins, and then a bunch of like the friends that we made in community. And we'd go on adventures together. And so I think I just have always loved stories. Even when I went to law school, I found like, wow, I really can. It was so much easier for me to actually study the material because cases are all stories. It's stories of one disaster after another, and the court's trying to parse through who did what and who's at fault, or who, you know, sometimes there's relative faults. So I think it's just always been what I've been drawn to. My head is full of stories. I remember stories the best about people. If I can't remember your name or where we met, I will remember like the story about you. But it wasn't until years later, you know, I'd been writing for a while. It wasn't until I went to my MFA program where I really found the courage to call myself a writer. And that was thanks to my faculty who were very encouraging. And, you know, kind of what they pointed out was I had an Indian American dean who said she never saw a writer or read a writer that was anything like her. They were all, you know, dead white men is what she described it as. And so she had this terrible imposter syndrome, like thinking that she couldn't be an author. And I definitely carried some of that as well. But it's been exciting to realize like when you lean into your own stories, that is when you really bring to the world what only you can bring.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an interesting thing to think about. When I was like writing my thesis at Vassar, I also had a little bit of a portion where I was asking people about Asian American representation, their lives growing up, and across the board, generally the experience is like very minimal representation that we saw. But I am curious about what that means for current young people who are seeing so many more just Asian faces in media, whether that's like in Marvel or in books. I think it's really exciting. I look forward to seeing
yeah, it's a different world. And I love seeing how much more confident the next generation of Asian American creators are. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I think you'll definitely see that this year's convention too, like with the people that we sort of have been able to get on our team for the Youth Leadership Council. They're all such driven young people and passionate about AAPI issues. And I know like even when we were interviewing some of the members, and like one of them was talking about Asian diaspora or something like that. And I was like, wow, I don't think I even heard this term until I got to college. It's amazing that like you already have this knowledge and you're already doing grassroots work and you're like 16 years old. Right. So I think that'll be really exciting to sort of see what they bring to the table. But speaking of which, I would love to ask, what are you looking forward to at this year's convention in DC?
Oh, well, I love Washington, D.C. So I feel like I cut my teeth there as a professional. I went there as an intern my sophomore summer. So my first summer was actually on Love Boat, the program for the book. My second summer was as an intern for Senator DeWine from Ohio. And I lived in a group in a house with a bunch of other girls from Harvard. And we just had the best time. And, you know, I love, like my first love is public policy and like how do we help shape a more just society? How do we legislate? How do we create laws that make people's lives better? And so I think just even coming to DC itself is going to be so much fun. And I grew up in Ohio, where my only point of contact and learning about Asian American kind of global issues was these conferences. And so I still remember learning about the Chinese Exclusion Act at one of these conferences, as well as like the fact that the Chinese built the railroads and weren't in any of the photos. Like, so those were stories that I know, I don't know that I would learn them any other way.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have specific topics that you're really interested or excited about discussing with like fellow panelists or other attendees?
Yeah, I think, for me, like some of the big themes are just is leadership. Asian Americans kind of are coming of age in this country and moving into leadership roles. And some of us have faced bamboo ceilings along the way. And how do we overcome that? How do we kind of move on and get to a place where we can make our biggest contributions to our country? I love, themes around women's leadership, implicit bias, the ways that we can all address that. I work in technology, so ethics in technology is a topic that's particularly near and dear to my heart. And then international relations, especially with the state of the world, things in Afghanistan, Ukraine. Like, I think we have a special voice to play as people who come from multiple cultures, and I think that we have a special role to play in helping to bridge differences, bridge miscommunications among peoples. And so I think that when we lean into those assets of ours, then again, that's how we can help the most people.
Yeah, definitely.